First, I make a disclosure. I'm not a teacher. I've never been a lecturer. I'm a practitioner. And I'm also a politician, a senator of Nyamira. Since I need to convince a few people who may want to vote for me, for the ladies, I'm a good man, married to one wife. And to the youngsters, I'm also a father of many children, including my firstborn, who is a lawyer. So I hope I've won one vote. Now, when I looked at this topic, sustainable governance, unveiling the intersection between tax burden, good governance, and protection of human rights, I was delighted because this is a current topic. This is what we are currently going through. This afternoon, the Senate will be casting the final vote in this bicameral parliament on the future of the affordable housing, which really means an increased tax burden on Kenyans. Now, unveiling the intersection, I thought that by the end of the discussion, we will have opened the curtains, and if tax burden, good governance, protection of human rights, assuming this is at a junction, we would have known which one is giving way to the other to pass, so that there is a good balance. Now, when I looked at what is sustainable governance, what came to mind is we are just trying to look at how a country is trying to manage and administer a country in a way that promises socioeconomic and environmental sustainability. As somebody said, when we are doing that, we need to marry the needs of the present generation, and of course without compromising the ability of our future generation, which include the people that I'm speaking before. And we must also have a balancing act, so that as we make progress, as we tax people, we also don't create a burden that becomes a threat to the exercise of their human rights. If I would speak quickly, then what could be, some of the key factors? One, there should be social equity. We should include everybody, okay? All people, including our, not paying any regard to our tribe, our race, our gender, and all that. And while appreciating that we need good governance and protection of human rights, we have to also be conscious that as a people, we also need economic prosperity. We need good roads, we need good hospitals, we need to ensure that our education system is good. So as we put in place our tax measures, we must also bear in mind that we need economic prosperity. But what is important is that our measures should not have an impact, a negative impact on us as a people. What then would be tax burden? When we are talking about tax burden, I was wondering, what is tax burden? If somebody was to draw a cartoon after I cast my vote today and say Senator Omogeni has contributed to increasing our tax burden, what will be the measure? And I thought the best measure would be to look at the percentage of the money that I'm taking from you as a Kenyan citizen to the government as a contribution to ensure that we have prosperity, development, we give you services, and we draw a line that as we put this burden on you, we don't impede on the human rights that you are supposed to enjoy as a Kenyan. So what should be the right bag? Is it we take 30%, 33%? I leave it to you. In my paper, because I don't have time, I tried to look at some of the pronouncements the court has made. About 6 weeks ago, the Court of Appeal affirmed a decision that was made by the High Court. I was privileged to be among the lawyers who argued before the High Court. And one of the articles that the court affirmed is Article 27 of the Constitution, that when we are passing tax legislations, we must not discriminate. We should ensure that the tax burden is shared equitably amongst all of us. And the court also saying that while, while the country is passing tax laws. And in this country, we have adopted what you call the annuality principle. Each year, we introduce finance bill before Parliament, and we make tax proposals that should be in place for 1 year. So each year, as we pass these taxations, we should bear in mind the prevailing circumstances. During COVID, the country was alert to the fact that the economic performance was not doing very well. Therefore, as Parliament, we reduced the tax burden on Kenyans during COVID. Pay-as-you-earn burden was reduced for those in the lower cadre. Now, under the Wood administration, there is a presumption that Kenya is a very prosperous country, so we are now enhancing the tax burden during this financial year. Now, the intersection is when you tax people, there is expectation from Kenyans that these resources will be used in a prudent manner. And I think that's where the concept of good governance comes in. First, when you tax us, we also expect you to be a country that is democratic. Allow Kenyans to exercise their right of choosing people who will sit in Parliament to pass those legislations. Number two, we should have rule of law. Somebody mentioned that there is a culture of defying court orders. When you have good governance, you will respect the rule of law, which will include obedience of court order. There will be transparency. Information is available. If you want to know who voted against or in favor of affordable housing, that information should be available. We should be a country that is very transparent, and we should also be accountable, very ethical. If I've taxed you, I should be accountable to you and ethical. If I'm a minister, I cannot unethically employ all my relatives to the exclusion of all other Kenyans. That's what good governance is all about. Then participation of the people, like what we are doing. You have a right to gather, participate, engage, have discussions. And then responsiveness. The government needs also to understand what are the needs and aspirations of Kenyans. If the tax is too much, if the tax burden is heavy, a responsive government should be able to listen. I also mentioned about issues of equity, etc. Now, on issues of protection of human rights, in my thoughts, the guiding principle should be that as we put in place these taxes, if we have to embrace good governance, it must go hand in hand with protection of human rights. And the underlying factor should be you must give the citizens the ability to enjoy their fundamental rights and freedoms. And we also live in a league of nations. There are things that ought to guide us. We have international law. We know that there are many countries that have put a percentage on the tax that you can take away from the income of citizens. Even in our own country, the Employment Act, and I've mentioned that in my paper, the Employment Act has put a percentage that even when you are looking for a loan, the bank will look at the portion of the salary that is remaining on your payslip. If you have exceeded, you will not get that loan. So we must ensure that we allow Kenyans to enjoy their fundamental human rights. We take into account what is in our constitution. The article on finance is very elaborate, and I've talked about the principles that are there, which is one, it says the burden of taxation shall be shared fairly. It says revenue that is raised nationally shall be shared equitably among national and county governments. So as you pass the affordable housing bill, you must ensure that revenue that is raised from the affordable housing tax is shared equitably among the national and county governments. The expenditure shall promote the equitable development of the country, including making special provisions for marginalized groups and marginalized areas. And then, of course, we need to enjoy what we are enjoying today when we speak of human rights, political freedoms, the right of speech, protection from the law, which is we have a right to gather here today and have this discussion. If we are dissatisfied, we should have a right to seek judicial intervention. Anybody dissatisfied with the laws that are passed by Parliament, you can move to court and challenge those laws. And then we have a right to educate Kenyans and make them aware. Is my 10 minutes over? Yeah? Seconds. So then in conclusion, as a responsible citizen and as a member of Parliament, I'm conscious that taxes are very crucial for government, because it's through raising revenue that we are able to provide public services, as I've mentioned. But the principle of good governance obligates governments to ensure that as you pass taxes, they should be fairness. In the tax policies that we pass, there should be transparency. The tax measures should not be arbitrary, but should be progressive. And when we spend the money that we get from taxpayers, there should not be corruption and mismanagement. What have I left? I think then in conclusion, I'll say that tax policies, if not implemented properly, can have serious direct implications on the enjoyment of human rights, as excessive taxation can have a negative impact on denying citizens the enjoyment of their fundamental human rights. Thank you.